Fáilte a Chairde Gael. This is episode 60 of the Rebel Matters podcast, and today's episode is a recording of a live podcast that was made as part of the very first Cork Podcast Festival in 2019, and it's a conversation with Jenny Higgin, who's been heavily involved in setting up the Gaza Women's Yoga and Circus Hub in Gaza. And it was great to sit down with Jenny because she's got a fantastic personal story, has been involved in this project, which is really inspirational, and also has a lot of similarities with the project that I'm working on myself at the minute, along with our little team from Cork, in setting up the Palestine community gym. I'll have a bit of a better update on that project itself in the coming episodes because it's kind of going full steam ahead at the minute, and we've got a few big pieces of the project to put in place, and once they're hopefully after going well, I'll let you know what's happening with that project. But it's a very exciting time for that project and kind of a pivotal time for that project as well. But anyway, in the meantime, enjoy this conversation with Jenny. As I say, it's a really interesting chat, and it's not often you get to chat with someone who's kind of involved in something similar, except Jenny's project and involvement in the Gaza Yoga and Circus Hub is a few years ahead of where we are with the Palestine community gym. So it was great to get that kind of a perspective on things as well. As usual, I've got a bit of Roald Dahl at the end of this episode. If you want a bit of story time, then just wait on until the end of the outro music at the end of the conversation with Jenny, and there's a bit of a story time reading there for you. And just one more thing before we get stuck into the chat with Jenny. Thanks a million to everyone who's been getting in touch through the various social media platforms and listening to the podcast. There was great feedback came from the episode with Maria Gillen, who's a storyteller and who I had a great chat with as part of the last episode. Of all the episodes that we've done so far, 60, when this one comes out, that episode with Maria is probably the one that most people have contacted me about, because there's a story there about a fox towards the end of the conversation with Maria, and loads of people got in touch to say that it really hit them in the feels, and a few people messaged back to say that they'd listened to it a few times and were shedding a few tears every time that they listened to it. So thanks very much everyone who got in touch, and for everyone who's been listening to the podcast and supporting it all along. And thanks very much to Maria, and actually just take this opportunity to thank all the guests that we've had on the podcast so far. We're coming up on the 60 episodes now, and we've been on the road a while. I really still love doing the podcast and love getting feedback from all of the listeners that are out there that get in touch, and most of all love meeting up with new people and spending a bit of time with the guests, who are always very kind and generous with their time and their stories. So Gurmila Maigov, he's a big bunch of legends. Let's get stuck into this episode with Jenny Higgin. Buon soltas.
You're welcome to the Rebel Matters podcast. It's the second time I've done a live episode, and I'm very grateful to Jenny Higgin for coming down from Dublin to be our guest today. And we're going to be chatting. I suppose the reason why I invited Jenny down was because she's involved in a project in Gaza that consists of a women's circus and yoga hub, and we're at the minute kind of involved in kind of a similar project to open a community gym in Bethlehem in the West Bank. So there's a bit of common ground there already, and I think we'll have a good chat. So thanks very much for coming down, and also thanks for you for coming down. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
this podcast, like I think the most challenging aspect of us doing this chat for me was to find the kind of starting point. So because it's a kind of a complicated issue, like what's happening out there, and people have more awareness than others of what's happening out there. And so maybe if it's possible that we try and maybe like set the context for the project that you have in terms of like the kind of brief, I guess, history of Palestine and how things ended up to be how they are. So we should be finished in about 6 hours, if that's okay with you.
I think you could do a whole podcast series just on Israel and Palestine. So yeah, I'm not sure how much I can cover, but I can at least set the context for Gaza and even a little bit maybe for the West Bank for the work that you do.
Yeah. Go for it.
So yeah, I suppose my first time that I actually ever went on a trip over to Palestine, I went on this tour at a place called Hebron with this organisation called Breaking the Silence, and they're former Israeli Defence Forces soldiers that now do tours of the occupied territory and talk about kind of, the violations that they saw there. But I remember him taking out this big map and he just said, so when there was Abraham. So I think that that's why I said you need a whole podcast series, because really you have to, it's so biblical, like you have to go all the way back to Abraham to really get to the roots of what's happening there and why people have the claims that they have. But I suppose it's maybe easier just to start with the context as it is today, because it's probably just easier than talking about the whys and doing it in a fair and correct way, because it's so complicated. And so I think today what you have is effectively Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, and the Palestinian territory consists of 2 parts. So you have the West Bank, which is actually east of Israel, but it's the west of the Jordan River, so that's why it's called the West Bank. And then you have Gaza, which is kind of separated from the West Bank by Israel. And Gaza is really tiny. It's a very small enclave, 42 kilometers long and 18 kilometers wide, and there's about 2 million people in there. And the West Bank is much bigger, but it's also divided in 3 parts under the Oslo Accords. And I won't go into the ins and outs of it, but pretty much you have A, B, and C. Areas A and B are where the majority of Palestinians live, especially in areas A, which are the big cities like Bethlehem, Ramallah, Nablus. And then you have B, which is outside and which the Israeli military still come into. And then you have C, which is 61% of the West Bank, and it's where all the best resources are. So the best farming land, the Dead Sea, quarrying, etc. And that's under full Israeli civil control and military control. And it was supposed to have been given back to the Palestinians in 1997 under the Oslo Accords, but it still exists today as this huge part of the land. And what exists now on that is an increasing number of illegal Israeli settlements, which are being built on an increasing scale every single year. And even most recently, the kind of current Prime Minister, but maybe not in the future, Benjamin Netanyahu, was saying he's going to annex whole sections of it to Israel. So currently what you have at the moment is these small enclaves of cities where Palestinians are kind of forced to live in smaller and smaller spaces. You also have within those cities refugee camps, which is where people from 1948 that lived in what's considered Israel now had to move. And also there was another war in 1967. So you have hugely densely populated cities, refugee camps within them that are even more densely populated. And then in Gaza you have 60% of the population are actually refugees, and it's the highest density, or it's most densely populated place on earth. So all in all, what you have is an increasing, de-development in Palestine. So it's actually where, in the world, in development work, and what NGOs look to do is increase development in different countries. In Palestine, it's actually increasingly going downwards and downwards and downwards, with increasing levels of unemployment, less places to live, less opportunities for the future. You also have in Gaza an increasing humanitarian crisis, continuing wars, continuing military escalations. 90% of the water is undrinkable. You have the highest unemployment rate in the world, and yet the highest youth population as well. It's really, you just have more and more young people that are feeling disenfranchised, that they have no future, and they're completely lost in terms of what opportunities there are, for the future.
And to put that into kind of like a year context, you mentioned 2 important years are in the history of Palestine and Israel. So Israel was essentially formed in 1948, which caused the first mass exodus of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. Then the next one was in 1967, which pushed more and more people into Gaza who were through either refugee or exiled there. Mm-hmm. And then really the next thing then was the Oslo Accords in the mid-90s, where the people have just been constantly going in there. And to put into context a little bit, you can talk about it more yourself, but whenever I was over there last year in the West Bank in Bethlehem, I rang a contact in Gaza and said, right here, so I want to come over and see us. He's like, how long have you got? I was like, well, I'm here for 2 weeks. And he's like, right, he's like, you might get in 2 weeks. He's like, but it might take you 3 months to get back out again. Yeah. And so Gaza is now known as the biggest open air prison in the whole entire world. Yeah. And I think that is an important context to set for the work that you're doing. So I guess, maybe could you give us a little bit of an idea of how did this end up happening? How are you how are you over there working, and how did it come about?
Yeah, and like I said, it's really hard to give an overview of what it's like in Palestine. I think the only way to do it is to actually go and see it for yourself, because you really can't understand this A, B, C difference in Gaza, difference in the West Bank until you're actually physically there, or understand what the checkpoints are like. And it's such a visceral experience. You really need to have it. But I suppose one of the differences that you really have between the West Bank and Gaza is, in the West Bank you have an ongoing military occupation. So outside of those cities, there's soldiers everywhere. There's checkpoints. There's the big wall that separates, Jerusalem and the West Bank and Israel. And so in some ways it feels a little bit more tense on the ground because you have so many soldiers. But the difference with Gaza is that in 2005, Hamas were elected into power, and since then, Israel, they did actually have settlements in Gaza, but they pulled all the Israeli settlers out, and then they completely barricaded it off, kind of like a medieval siege. But that is really what it is. So it's been under blockade since then, and what that blockade means is that goods, movement, everything is completely restricted in and out. So only really a handful of humanitarian workers, journalists, and diplomats actually get to go in and out of Gaza. And so, I kind of have 2 lives, I suppose. So my first life is that I actually, my background is I studied human rights and I work for a development NGO. And that's how I started going in and out of Gaza, because I have to apply for a permit from the Israeli authorities, and actually also have to get a Hamas permit. And so getting in and out of Gaza, it's like, you actually couldn't do it in 2 weeks. I have to apply 6 weeks in advance. And you have to be with an international organisation that's actually registered in Jerusalem. So it's really, really complicated, and it's a real privilege that I feel like I have, and that I'm lucky enough to be able to continue to do work there. But getting in and out, it takes a half a day, because you have to do 3 different checkpoints. You have to do the Israeli one, then you have to do the Palestinian Authority one, which is the government of the Palestinian government, and then Hamas have another one. So it's complicated to say the least.
And there's one thing that is very clear when you have to fly into Tel Aviv, I guess, when you're going over there, and Palestine aren't actually in control of their borders anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's an important kind of thing that I maybe wasn't really aware of as much until I actually went there. Yeah. So how did you end up setting up this Circus hub in Gaza?
Yeah, so my previous job, I was working specifically on Israel and Palestine for an Irish NGO for Troker. And I was going in and out, because Troker is a partnership organisation, so they work only with local partners on the ground, which means we don't implement anything, but we go and we visit the local organisations, mostly human rights organisations, and monitor their work, see how it's going, provide assistance. And so I was going over twice a year, 3 times a year, just to go and meet with the partners. And we had some in Gaza. So that was how I first started getting to go into Gaza. And I know I mentioned my one part of my life earlier, but my second part is that I do circus. And I'm a circus teacher, specifically aerial acrobatics. And actually I started here in Cork, because I studied for my degree in Cork. And it was a way for me to make friends as a Dubliner in Cork, because nobody likes Dubliners down here. And so, I never really imagined that it is funny, having this hobby, because you do find these really random circus schools in different parts of the world, and this idea of social circus is a way to help, you know, women and children and people that have suffered trauma to kind of come out of their shell and reconnect is kind of growing a little bit. So like there's one in Ramallah in the West Bank, they have a big tent, they have a really big project there. So I knew about that already, and I had been in touch with them, and but I didn't think that there was one in Gaza. And anyway, I had this local fixer that I used, this guy named Jimmy, and he's kind of one of these guys that like he can get anything you need done, you just don't ask him how he did it. And so and he seems to know everybody, know what's going on. So I was WhatsApping him, like we were calling once a week so I could practice my Arabic, and one day he just sent me pictures of a bunch of people doing circus in Gaza, and I was like, what? And he's like, isn't this what you do? I was like, that is what I do. Well, maybe I could do that there. So I started to try and think of ways that maybe I could get like some funding together to go over and actually do it. And I asked Troker if they would help facilitate my permit, because that's the biggest issue. And so we actually applied to Culture Ireland, and I got a small Culture Ireland grant for myself and another guy, Henrik, a Dublin-based circus guy, to go over. And this is 3 years ago. And we put on a circus show in Gaza. So we worked with, there's like 2 local circus groups, and what I find really funny is that one is the Gaza circus team and the other one is the circus team for Gaza. And of course they have a rivalry. They fight with each other. And so recently a third one has now opened, the Gaza Stars team for circus. Which I think really this is like so Palestinian.
Life of Brian kind of stuff.
So Life of Brian, yeah. And also it's just like, I really feel like conflict just breeds conflict as well. Like, and but anyway, I managed to get them to work together. And during that time, I had thought, because I knew that the circus school in Ramallah worked with women, that I'd be able to get some women to come and join me, you know, and do some of the circus stuff with me. And I really underestimated how difficult it would be, because Gaza, the more closed off it gets, the more conservative it gets. And actually, like, what you have in the West Bank, in these cities where internationals are going in and out as well, is like, just, you know, more, you know, you have more wealth, but you also have more like liberal communities, you know, but in Gaza it's like, it's just regressing, you know, and people, like, there's just such different ideas about what's expected from men and women. And kind of for girls, once they hit puberty, like once they hit 14, like there's nothing for them to do. Like they might have done dabka classes, like the traditional Palestinian dance, or just loads of stuff, but like there's loads of opportunities when you're a girl, but once you hit puberty, like that's it, there's really nothing. And I also didn't realise like how difficult it would be to even convince more liberal girls, you know, like that don't wear hijab or anything, to even try it. I mean, like, it's hard enough, you know, if I've got a beginner in Dublin, to convince them to let me like throw them up on a trapeze, you know, without some trepidation. But there it's like multiplied by 10, you know, it was really difficult. But I did manage in the end to get these 2 girls to try a little bit of it, but they only tried it after 3 days of watching me do it. And once we removed all the guys from the space. But then when we had our show, I couldn't be in it and no women could be in it. It could only be men. And the audience was mixed, but that kind of gave me this idea to go back and set up something for women, you know, and create a space for only women. And when these girls tried it for the first time, they told me, like, I wish I had a space that I could actually just do this in, that I could go to and be free, because there's so many interventions in Gaza, but there's hardly any for recreation for women. And as you know, like, it's so important, like this connection between mind and body, and I'm sure you understand like the benefits like physical exercise can give to you mentally, you know?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because one of the most common questions that people have asked me about the project that we're involved in, and people have kind of come up to me, like, sometimes, there's been a couple of times they were raging. They're like, but like, why are you trying to do this? Like, open up a gym or a space for like exercise or health? Like, does not need like, would you not be better off getting them some food or like medical supplies? And there was a couple of people who were genuinely pissed off that we were putting so much of our effort and like getting other people to help us in the raising this money to open up a place that was for recreation. And you've kind of answered that question in itself already about why you would do that. But has anybody asked you that?
Oh yeah, I mean, all the time, like, and all the jokes as well about, like, especially because I'm teaching people like silks or rope, they're like, oh, you teach them to climb over the walls, you know? Really very bad taste jokes. But yeah, it does happen, because I suppose there's this perception, especially in Gaza, like when you think of Gaza, you just immediately envision bombed buildings, you know, kids on the street, no food, and like that is true, you know, like I mean now because there hasn't been a war since 2014, the bombed buildings it's really not obvious. There's like 2 or 3, you know, like, but they quick, like now they're clearing them up much quicker. But in terms of like yeah, there is huge poverty. Like 80% of people do rely on aid. But just because they rely on aid doesn't mean that they don't need the other things in life, you know? And you also have like, when you have swathes of people that are just attempting to live, like none of us would want that to be the only thing we're ever thinking about, you know? And life it's so hard there, and especially for women, you know, because what's happening in Palestine is there's this real crisis of masculinity where men, like it's quite a patriarchal society, you know, but like men can't provide for the family the way that they normally would, you know, and there's all these, even in the West Bank, the checkpoints, you know, the constantly being monitored, you know, like the incursions, the wars, the soldiers, and so men feel disempowered to provide for their families, and so their space of control becomes the home, which is the traditional space of the woman, and so gender-based violence is then increasing. And yet for men, there's loads of spaces they can go to get away from stress. Like on a Friday in Gaza, like the one thing that Gaza has is the beach, which is like such a source of like, I don't know, and it's a one positive, I suppose, is that they have this beautiful sea and beach. I mean, it's also sad because they know when they look out to it, they can't go that way as well, because it's they can only go up to 3 kilometers before the Israeli ships will arrest them. But on the beach on a Friday, which is the day off, you'll have like hundreds of guys like rollerblading, horse riding, doing street workout, parkour. I mean, you name it, the hobby is in Gaza already. Like they even have a half pipe. Like everything exists for guys. But women, they can't even really walk out on the beach at night time. You know, like even when I went there for a whole month when I was first setting up this project. And I used to have to get, like, you know, we're so used to walking everywhere, and it's so weird for me that I can't just go out for a walk any time of the day that I want. You know, first of all, as a foreigner, because that's not really allowed in Gaza, because the security restrictions are really high. But even for my friends, they would always take taxis or drive. They would never walk like 20 minutes from A to B. So I used to have to get 2 guys to come and get me in the morning really early so I could go for a walk, you know, just to get that bit of exercise. And that was just me with a simple walk, like, you know, and imagine if you can't even walk anywhere, you can't do anything. And for women, really all there is like gyms, but like nobody likes the gym, like a, you know, not your gym, but yeah. but I mean, like, you know, like a normal gym where there's not people helping you, you know, like it's kind of isolating, you know. And I know that the way that you run your gym is that it's always facilitated, you know, and I think that that's what's important. It's that connection with people, you know, like, and that interaction, that's what matters, you know.
You mentioned a good few things there about the situation out there that are really like magnified versions of what we're experiencing here ourselves, in the sense that like once girls hit the like mid-teens, then the exercise rate drops down. As general, probably as a society, we probably trivialize the importance of our own health. And that has a massive impact. Like if you look at the mental health issues that we're suffering from in this country, and like how that's affected society in the last few years, that's a big issue. And then also, I guess the fact that I mean, in general, it's probably the same here, that like women oftentimes don't feel comfortable in places where like there's training happening or gyms. Like people come into our place every day of the week and express that they don't feel comfortable in a gym, or felt like people were watching them, or kind of intimidated. So I guess, and that's kind of the sense that I get from being in Palestine as well. It's like people trying to go about their normal lives, but every problem that we have is like magnified by 100 out there in a way, and everything's so intense.
Yeah, and I also think Palestine really reminds me of, like, say, Ireland 30 years ago or something, you know. It's still this it's this conservativeness, you know, also this kind of, I suppose they don't learn enough about like boys and girls mixing, and there's that shyness there. But yeah, I mean, I think any, like, and there's a reason why these kind of gym or social circus projects are popping up in so many places, you know. Like my idea wasn't totally in isolation, you know, like actually in Australia they set up a women's circus, which was for female survivors of domestic abuse, you know, and I use a lot of their methodology when writing my own proposals. And even in the south of Turkey, in Afghanistan, I was in Rwanda and I ran into a circus group there. You know, like Colombia have huge ones. Like nearly everywhere in the world, you'll find these social circus or recreation activities starting to pop up, you know. And I think it just shows that people are beginning to really understand that, you know, poverty, inequality and trauma, it's not enough just to provide the basics in life like food and water and shelter, but that actually, you know, humans are complicated. We have more needs than that, and one of the needs we have is to find some way to shut off, to not have to think about daily life, to connect with other people, you know, connect with our own bodies. Because also I think the importance, like with going to do like workouts or circus, it's this idea of like, if you feel like completely out of control in the rest of your life, but yet you end up feeling like stronger and more connected with your body, it gives you that sense of control, you know, and strength that maybe, especially for women, they would never have had, you know.
About 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a team of like under 14 footballers going around Ireland doing a wee tour.
Yeah.
We were playing in Cork in the Mardic and found out about it. I ran down and to the match and watched it and asked them if they wanted to come to the gym afterwards for a little training session, and they were like, yeah, I would love to. So I kind of ran back to our gym and I just ran. I was like, hey, we're closed. Like, everyone, just like bring people outside for an hour. And they came around. There was 30 of them. We had control of them for about 5 minutes, and then they went mental. And their coach was just like, this is the first time they've ever been in a place like this. And they were like at the end, like, can we keep these tennis balls? We were like giving them balls to bring away and stuff. And
no, totally.
It was class. But what's the overview of the hub and the centre that you have out there now?
So pretty much with the project, so after that initial trip in 2016, and I knew I wanted to set up something, I suppose one benefit I probably have is that my background is in this kind of international development and charity work. So I understand my way around a project proposal, which is both a blessing and a curse, because I really hate doing them, but at least I have the skills to be able to do it. So I started developing. So I took 2 trips in 2017, and at this stage I'd actually changed job. So I was using my holidays to go to Gaza, which might be a unique thing. You know, I think maybe I'm one of the only people that's like, and now at work it's a joke, you know, every time they're like, oh, you're off next week, where are you going? Are you going to Gaza? And I'm like, yeah, that is where I'm going. In 2017 I went twice, and I went specifically to try and understand and research what kind of project would be best to open, because we were talking a bit about this before, like you want to be really conscious of this whole like white savior kind of aspect, you know, and that's something I really, really want to be conscious about, which is that I'm not just coming in to save the day and I know what's best, you know, and I'm going to just do whatever I think will work for people. Like I really wanted to understand from women what I could do that would benefit them, and knowing that I have a specific set of skills and interests, you know, but I didn't want to just come in and open a circus space if no one wanted to actually do it, you know. So I first of all started meeting local women's organisations in Gaza to kind of, because I knew I would need one of them to manage it in order to be able to get proper like international funding from big NGOs such as like, you know, the UN or, you know, any or ones similar to Trócaire. And so I met with different ones just to talk to them about what their projects were, to see which ones would fit best with the idea. And so eventually I met with this one organisation called Aisha, and they're a feminist women's organisation that work on psychosocial support in Gaza, and I found them to be the most enthusiastic and ask the right questions and really understand what the idea was. And then I had some focus group discussions pretty much with women, so where we put out a call for women from all over Gaza to come, you know, just to have like a small roundtable discussion. And so we had women like some in hijab, some in full niqab, you know, like talking about what they would like. And so it was really positive. I mean, first of all, no one knew what the hell I was talking about when I was talking about circus, you know. But then when we kind of showed the pictures, and I had the 2 girls that had tried it with me before, the other thing that we had to fight was this perception that you have to be young and thin to do sport. And the thing is most women over there aren't, like, you know, if you're not ever exercising and you're not, and if you have kids and stuff, you know, they might not be so self-confident about their bodies, but anybody can pick up 3 juggling balls, you know, and try juggling. And that's why I like the kind of social circus side, because it's a way to get fit that's not too strenuous on the body. But once I had the two girls there, you know, talking about them trying it and showing them some pictures, they were really enthusiastic. They just never thought that this would be something they could try. And then another thing that came out a lot was yoga, that everybody would love, that they've heard lots about yoga, about the benefits, and that this would be something they'd love to try. So then in the end, the project became, and it's not a catchy title, I do get that, like the Gaza Women's Yoga and Circus Hub. It's a bit long, but unfortunately, like all those project proposals, they need kind of a to-the-point title. So yeah, unfortunately, that's the name.
I was going to say
yeah. And so then I went back in January 2018 for a whole month to set up the project, and pretty much the idea then that came for our pilot was to do a training for trainers. So there was no point me coming in, doing a few workshops and leaving again. We needed to empower a group of women to be teachers. And so I worked with, luckily enough, actually, my aunt is a yoga teacher trainer, and she's one of the most well-known ones in Dublin, and she runs one in Spain. And so she agreed to come with me and run that training. But talking to her, we were like, okay, normally to be trained to be a yoga teacher, you need to have 2 years yoga experience. So how do we do this in a place where we have nothing, you know? And so she was like, well, let's work with qualified physiotherapists. So at least then they have some, and like the other thing I should say as well is, despite the situation sounding really awful for women in Gaza, which it can be, there's actually a really high level of education, and that's because of all the UN projects. And so most women especially, actually have university degrees that just go completely to waste. Like there's 70% unemployment for women. It's really, really high. And most projects that look to empower women for work or do like entrepreneurship tend to be really gendered, where they teach women to do embroidery or food or dressmaking or open a dress shop, you know. And so we thought if we could take women who have qualifications and train them in something kind of related. So we did a call for qualified physiotherapists to become yoga teachers, and then myself and the organisation Aisha discussed taking social workers or psychologists to be the social circus trainers. So we got 13 psychologists and social workers, and then we got 20 physiotherapists, and we ran like a week and a bit of training for them to become teachers. I think the hardest part of that 1 month was not actually finding the women or doing the training for trainers, it was actually finding a suitable space. Because the one thing about finding somewhere to do recreation in Gaza is that there's not many places where women can congregate in big numbers. It just doesn't happen. And like when I say there's a lack of social spaces for women, like I really mean it. And it's kind of like there is a bit of a class system. So if you're from like a good family in the middle of Gaza, like you can go to different nice restaurants and smoke shisha and hang out with your friends there. But if you're from a refugee camp or out in the margins, there's not really anywhere you can go. And normally the only time they all meet up is at weddings or a henna, and a henna is like the equivalent of a hen party, except there's 400 women at it as opposed to like 20. They're pretty fun. They're very epic actually. And so what we needed to do was find a space that was accessible in a nice enough area that women could be seen going in and out of it without anyone kind of, that's the other thing in a closed off space, is gossip is like rampant, and that they could be seen to be going, and also that had like if it had windows, they were like misted or with curtains so that people can't see in, so that they could be comfortable taking their hijabs off to actually do the training. And that actually took the longest. And we did find somewhere, but actually the guy saw us coming as an international organisation and like ripped us off on the rent. But we've actually moved now, and Aisha, the organisation, like now they're so committed to the project, they actually bought a building for it, and it's amazing. It's like, so pretty much what we have now is one space, and it has like 2 bathrooms and a kitchen, and we've all the equipment there, and it's all closed off, like, but it still has some windows with nice curtains, and it's probably the most feminine circus space I've ever been in. Like normally circus spaces, like they're dirty, like normally you can't keep like white socks on, you know, they're kind of like hippie places, you know, but this place you could walk around with white socks and it would be immaculate. Like it is so unbelievably clean. It's amazing. But it's actually become this space now for them to meet up even when they're not teaching, and like they'll have birthday parties there, and all 30 of the women now get together, like, and they'll put money together, and in Gaza you can rent like a chalet with a swimming pool, private, and they'll do that, and they'll have like a day out, and it's become this community. And so after the first pilot project, where we spent 6 months just kind of getting them to self-practice and we did like 3 training for trainer sessions, now they start to teach, and they get paid to teach, which for me is the most important part. So we've been lucky enough to get funding from the Government of Canada, and also Ireland gave us a small grant. And so what happens with that money is we pay for the transport for women from marginalised areas or refugee camps to come to the space, and then we pay the women to teach classes to them, you know. So that's kind of where we're operating at the moment.
There's so many things there that I'm trying to remember to ask you about. But I think that for me, one of the things that was like a big motivator to get involved in doing something out in Palestine was the similarity that I sensed to the stuff that we went through when we were kids, say in West Belfast and stuff like that. And one of the things was that kind of phenomenon of someone parachuting in, telling the local people what to do, and then fucking off again, and then just thinking that they did a good job. And I know that's like one of the main things we wanted to address in our project, and that you guys are doing as well. But another thing that I guess you've kind of talked about in a way there is the one big sense that I got from the organisations that helped us when we were kids in West Belfast in the like 80s and the 90s up to the 2000s and stuff, was that I got the exact same sense in Palestine, is that despite everything that's going on and the oppression and the occupation and all the restrictions that they have in their day-to-day life, they still want to be able to do things for themselves. And the kind of motto that we always had in Belfast was "Na habare Johnny," like don't do it, don't say it, just do it.
Yeah.
And another like a really well-known activist, Father Des Wilson from our area, always said, like, if it's out there for you. You just have to go and do it yourself. And I think that's a really important part of the project that you guys have, is like it's handing it just back to them in a way.
Yeah, no, totally. And like for me, what I see is the measure of success is that I don't have to go anymore. You know, that I have this group of women that are perfectly able to train on their own, to teach on their own, to get the funding that they need, and that it's a space like run by and for Palestinian women. You know, and like, you know, we're pretty close. Like the project has now been open for 1.5 years. I mean, the one thing, and you know this as well in Bethlehem, is like there's a funding crisis. Like there's no money for any projects in Palestine. You know, partly because the US has pulled out an absolute ton of funding, you know, because of Trump, but also because a lot of the money in the Middle East is still going towards the Syrian crisis and the refugee crisis, and you see less and less small grants for smaller initiatives, and instead it's like big pots of money for big multilateral institutions like the UN, which is a real shame, you know, because how do you get something like this up and running whenever like people there's no like extra cash, nobody has money to do things like this, you know.
The other thing that I kind of got the feeling about whenever I was out there is that in terms of the funding is there is, and this is maybe like going a little bit deeper than we have time to in this podcast, but leading on from the Oslo Accords in the mid-90s, when the Palestinian Authority was set up, and the years after that bred a lot of mistrust with the Palestinian people, because a lot of them felt that they were sold out, and that the Palestinian Authority is just kind of a puppet of the Israeli government in a way. And I know, like, I was talking to a few people out there about different projects that started off independently, and then the Palestinian Authority took control of them, and then kind of used it as a PR thing to justify their own existence, and to kind of give the impression that they were doing something in favour. So I know that a couple of people that I spoke to were kind of reluctant to take money from the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians themselves, and we're looking like internationally and from different sources to get the funding for projects like that there.
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever looked at international funding, and also, well, Gaza exists in a very different bubble, you know, than some of the stuff in the West Bank. Like, there'd be no Palestinian Authority funding there, and I mean, you're definitely not going to take Hamas funding for a women's social circus project. I don't think they would even offer it. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, Gaza is run on the funding from international NGOs, you know. If tomorrow suddenly they couldn't get access, it would collapse. You know, and this is the thing about Gaza, like every year there comes these dire warnings about, you know, like I remember 2 years ago the UN said by 2020 Gaza is unlivable. but like we're 3 months from 2020, and people are still living, but it is already unlivable. Like that's not a situation you can live in, And the problem is like with more insecurity about funding, then I suppose our kind of projects do kind of fall to the wayside, because then it is about where do you get the funding. Like if the US isn't giving the money to UNRWA, the UN agency, then where are you going to get the funding for even food or water? And it is becoming increasingly more dire. So like actually for us now, we are trying to start thinking about models where we don't rely on international funding anymore. And so the way that we're thinking of moving, because now we've just finished up with our funding from Ireland, is kind of some sort of self-sustaining model. So the area where the school is actually located, or the hub, is in kind of a wealthier area of Gaza. I know it seems weird to think about wealthy areas, but there is. And in that area, we've actually had, like, we set up a Facebook page, and we've gotten quite a bit of media and stuff around the fact that we've this like first yoga school in Gaza, and we get hundreds of messages every day from women asking about how they can take classes. And we haven't had like open classes yet. Everything has been really organised. So now what we're hoping to do kind of from next month is set it up that we will have classes that women can sign up to, like a course of 6, and then that the teachers get paid a set fee from this, kind of like you would set up a yoga or circus place here, like they get paid a set fee, except that whatever profit that we make gets put back into giving free classes. And this way we won't have to rely on international funding. I won't have to do any more of those project proposals that I really enjoy doing. And hopefully then that becomes, like, I also feel like it could be a more empowering model, because it's them generating their own money to help other women, as opposed to constantly relying on international governments. And also, like, a lot of restrictions come with that funding, you know what I mean? It's not always, they don't always fund everything you want in your project, So I feel like if we can get this up and running in a way that helps us generate enough income to give free classes, it'll be a much better model for them as well.
You mentioned something there that just kind of sent a little spark off in my mind of something I wanted to ask you about anyway. And as I was saying, like, one of the things that motivated me to go over there in the first place was the sense that I got that there's something similar happening over there that we went through in Ireland. And when I went over there, I was like, whoa, I was like, fuck, I was right. I was like, we were walking down the street, and I was in Hebron with a tour guide who had
and just to say, Hebron is the worst.
Hebron
is worse than Gaza. Hebron is, I'm just really quickly to explain, it's like a small city where they divided it in half because it's where the tomb for Abraham is, and so there's 500 illegal Israeli settlers, and there's 3 soldiers for every settler, and they've just turned the old city into a ghost town. And we could walk down it, but a Palestinian can't. And there's so many soldiers. I can't even describe it. Like, I saw a video once of a little girl. She lost her bike, went down a hill, and it went onto a road she couldn't go onto. So the soldier took it and fucked it over a wall.
The biggest irony about Hebron is that the whole city is closed off because of a massacre that was carried out by an ex-Israeli soldier in a mosque as well. But we were walking down one of the closed off streets, Al Shawada Street, with a tour guide, an Israeli tour guide, and I was talking, he was an ex-soldier as well, and I was like, is that the parachute regiment there? And he just turned around, he's like, how did you know that there? I was like, they've got the exact same uniform as the British Army, the exact same, there's so many things that are similar. Yeah. And when I went out there, I started making this list. I was like, the checkpoint on Al Shawada Street in Hebron is very similar to the checkpoint that we had at the start of the street going into the city centre up until the 90s in Belfast. And I had this massive list, but then at the same time, I also had a massive list of things that aren't the same, and I kind of went over there with that perception that, right, it's a lot of similar stuff, and but then I went over there and I was speaking to young people in Bethlehem and stuff like that there, and some of the people were saying that they had felt this sort of sense of oppression from within the Palestinian community and from the Palestinian Authority and the governing bodies there. So the question that I wanted to ask you was, have you had resistance to this project from within Gaza and from within the Palestinian sort of community?
We definitely have. And also just to say, I agree with you on the similarities. Like, my whole family is from Donegal, and then I have aunts in Antrim as well. So the first time I went through Kalandia checkpoint, which is the biggest checkpoint between Jerusalem and Ramallah, I was like, wow, this is like mine. Like, seriously, it's like flashbacks, you know, of like someone checking under your car with the mirror and everything. Like it's really surreal. Yeah, I mean, in Gaza, as I said, it's quite conservative. So we have to just be really careful about how we went setting it up. So one of the things we just made sure was that we weren't very vocal about it, you know, because our main thing is not even the Palestinian Authority or it's Hamas, you know, like, and so we just made sure that it's very private. We don't have any signage. But then once we set up and people started to hear that we'd set up, we started to get a lot of media attention because people love a story like that, you know, like first yoga school opens in Gaza, or, you know, like they're just really into it. Now, we always give it to the women to decide if they want to. A lot of them won't have their photograph taken. So if a photographer wants to come, we ask them. We had like one come and he took a few beautiful photos. And then we were even in the New York Times, I think Reuters picked it up. So loads of big news agencies picked up this story. But the problem wasn't even that, it was the local media. And so I think one local news station came and did like a small interview with the manager. And then when it went up online, like we had loads of guys kind of commenting about how we were trying to convert people to Hinduism and like not to Islam, and just crazy. But the one thing that was actually amazing was I still work with the guys that I do circus with, and there's a core group of them that I consider really good friends. And whenever I was always struggling for anything to do with the women's project, like I remember we hadn't got the space painted on time to start the first class. They all came with no electricity, turned the cameras on their phone and helped me paint the walls to get it finished for the next day. Like the guys have really been unbelievably supportive of this idea. And what I could see then is them going in and arguing with all these people underneath, you know. So for everyone that we have that is against the project, we have someone else who's willing to fight for it, which I think is really important.
And that's one thing that I felt as well, in that there might be this sense of overbearing oppression, for whether it's from the Israelis or from authorities within the Palestinian community, but at the same time, like the people who are living under the oppression are all sticking together regardless of whether they're men or women or young or old. No, absolutely. I mean, like, they live under so many layers of oppression, but the main one being like the ongoing occupation, you know, like not just, you know, you can't, like I said, you can't imagine how it feels until you're there. And like Hebron is the perfect example of it. And Gaza, even though in Gaza you don't see soldiers every day, but you hear drones like constantly. And I even know now what drone sound means what, you know, like I can hear if they're high or low. And, you know, I've actually been there as well, like during a really intense bombing as well. Like last year I was 200 meters from a building that got hit with 3 F-16s, you know, and that was probably a moment that I definitely peed my pants. It was like really terrifying, but that was me experiencing it just once. And like they didn't even react. And the women the next day were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to experience that." I'm like, "Why are you apologizing to me? Like you didn't cause this." But like on top of all the stuff that I talk about, like, you know, the conservative society, everything, on top of this is literally weekly still like airstrikes, escalations, bombings, and things that you just don't hear about in the news. Like whenever, like something as simple as like say I was there 2 weeks ago and you'd be doing a whole day training and all you want to do is go home and have a shower. The shower is salt water. Like it's a salty shower and you don't want that after you've been sweating, because then you're just becoming more salty. So, you know, it's not the best. And then, you know, 3 to 4 hours of electricity every day, which means you can't even operate your fridge. The sewage system doesn't work, so it runs straight out to the sea. So even though you have this beautiful sea, swimming in it might make you really sick. And like I remember 2 summers ago when the electricity was really bad, like 2 kids died from getting sick from the sea. Like it's just layer upon layer. And I suppose what you hope with your project in Bethlehem and what I want with my project in Gaza is to provide this space where they just don't have to think about that anymore, because it really is important to provide that opportunity. After coming back from there was actually the most kind of intense period for me in terms of like trying to comprehend what was going on out there, because when you're out there and the West Bank isn't like that sort of like constant intensity in the way that you're describing there, but there's a lot of stuff going on, there's soldiers everywhere, the situation can change and a drop of a hat, the situation can change. And it was only when I was out there, you're going around meeting people, you're talking to people, you're getting friendly with people. But it was only when I came back, like I remember I came back on a Saturday or something, and I was like, right, day off on Sunday, I'm back to work on Monday. And then I woke up Monday, I was like, I couldn't leave my room for a week.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to ask you about that in a second, but another question that I think that I started asking myself after I came back and spent a lot of time in those periods of like after the trips that I did, just sitting kind of contemplating like, why did I go out there? I was asking myself, why did I go out there? Not in the way that like not in a way that I regretted going out there at all, but I just kind of went inside myself and be like, okay, what's the actual motivation for going out there? And it was a tough question for me to answer. It took a long time for me to maybe like go back like 20 years and try and figure out what was the thing that caused me to be curious about it and go out there and then become involved in this project. And I guess that's the question that I want to ask you next is like, why did you end up doing this?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing as well about the coming back, like, so I've been going out there now 3 times a year for like maybe 4 or 5 years, and so my boyfriend knows that like the minute I get home, he just has to leave me sit on the sofa and have a good sob for like a good hour, and he just like walks away. I'm just like, it's because when you're there and you're working and you're on it, like you're not thinking about it, but then the minute you come home and the dust kind of settles on what you've seen and experienced, for me it's that you're sad, but also that you're angry and frustrated because you're just like, why does no one else care? Or why are people not doing more about this? And you know, I often ask myself as well, like, why is it that, like, and with my job I travel a lot, you know, to different countries. I work on a lot of injustice, like I've been to Colombia and Rwanda, and why is it that Palestine is always the one that sticks to me a little bit more than other situations? Like I visited indigenous communities in Colombia that have been suffering violence for generations, you know, and I think for me with Israel and Palestine, it's the stark inequality, and it's the increasing amount of legislation and international pressure that just keeps the situation the way it is, you know. It's so systematized, and so that's probably why I keep going back. But I mean, the reason why I started going was I suppose I was fortuitous enough to get a job, you know. That I mean, I studied politics here in Cork, and then I did my master's in human rights, and I didn't initially expect that the Middle East would become my thing, but I just through a series of, I suppose, like happy coincidences, I ended up working. I worked for a year in the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Middle East unit, and I was working specifically on Israel and Palestine. And then when I got my job with Troker, working out there specifically, like that was my first time I ever went, was with work, and I thought I knew everything because I'd been for a year in the department, and then I realised I knew absolutely nothing. And that's why I think, like, for people who are interested, like, go. Like, I actually think people need to go, because first of all, the West Bank doesn't get enough tourist dollars, you know, and even in Bethlehem, you just have buses of people on pilgrimages literally get bussed into the church, and then they get on a bus and they leave, and they don't even realise that they've actually crossed into Palestine or into the West Bank, like, no clue. And I met a tour guide. I remember when I first went to the Church of the Nativity, and there was nobody there, like no one. And then I was there with some people who'd never been, and we went to go in, and it was packed to the rafters, you know. And a guy told me that this year they had 700,000 more pilgrims than before. So there is this kind of push to have more people visiting, but not to the places that need to be visited or need the money from that. And like I said, if you're interested in the conflict, you do want to do more, you can read, you can look at as many websites, documentaries, etc., but it does not give you the same sense as going there and meeting the people. And Palestinians are some of the most generous, funny, lovely people you'll ever meet. Like, they would give you the coat off their back, like, honestly.
To bring that example of the Church of Nativity, another level is like that there was a massive siege there in 2000 or 2002 during the last Intifada, and when you go and visit the Church of Nativity, there's no mark to say that happened, but you just need to look up a little bit, and there's still bullet holes all around from where the soldiers were attacking the church whenever people were in there for like 40 days or something like that. You know, when you do come back, or even when you're out there, do you get a sense of, like, what sense do you get from the people? Because I know I have kind of like thought about this myself in my own head, but do you get a sense of hope from the people, or a sense of desperation?
Oh, yeah. It depends, you know, it could really depend. I feel like in Gaza now, it's worse, like, than it's ever been. And like, I think when there's a war, it's almost easier because people are kind of buzzing off adrenaline. You know, they're buzzing off adrenaline, they're kind of on the move. There's so much international attention. People are getting jobs as fixers for journalists and working in the media. But now, you know, and for the 2 years after the war, because there's been a war every 2 years, everyone was kind of like, oh, the next war is coming, you know. But then it hasn't come. And now what we're in is this state of kind of like just static, pure static, where they feel abandoned by the international community, especially since Trump has come into power. Like, Palestinians feel almost like that's it, you know. And even with the most recent Israeli elections, like, people were like, oh, I hope the other guy, Gantz, gets it. But like, no, he's going to be the same, you know. And it's just becoming like increasingly difficult for them to find hope, you know. Like, that's not to say that they're not hopeful people, you know. Like, they are positive people, but when you ask them about what they see for the future, it's really difficult, you know. And everyone will have a different. If you're from Jerusalem, you'll have a different answer than if you're from Hebron or if you're from Gaza. But in Gaza now, really what I get from people is just like where they don't see any future, you know. And I remember once this guy in the UN told me, like, it's the most carefully managed humanitarian situation. It'll never be where people are dying in reams on the street, you know, because that would bring too much attention. It's this like very careful managing of the ability for people to live, you know. And now what I've been seeing with like a lot of like, actually 2 nights ago I was in Brussels and I met a guy who he was my student, that first project I did, and he managed to, the only entrances to Gaza are the Israeli side, one, and that's really difficult, and then there's one to Egypt, and that was closed for like over a year, but now if you pay like a bribe, pretty much you can get out. And he managed to get out, go to Turkey, took a migrant boat to Greece, has been on a Leros island for 6 months, and then I just met him in Belgium like 3 days ago. And like and he's just like, the last year of my life was hell, but now, like, at least I have a future, you know? And that's really where it's at, where I now know 4 guys in Leros that took the boat, you know?
On that subject of hope, and I guess it kind of ties into the story that when you're out there and you come back and you tell the story, which is what the Palestinians want, is like that's the main thing that they get from visitors, I feel anyway, is that they get the opportunity to share their story with people like international friends, and then they in turn come back and do a podcast and then tell people about it. But I kind of felt in a way kind of a bit of a weight of responsibility not to come back and just be like, yes, the Palestinian people are, they're resilient and they're like sticking together and they're fighting against the occupation, and that they're going to be victorious someday, and there's going to be Palestine, like, is going to have its own kind of international sovereignty back one day. But that's like coming back to that kind of story of hope in a way can be negative, because they're fighting against like the most sophisticated army in the world, and every aspect of their lives is being like put down every single day, which I think, like, personally for me is like that's the importance of the type of project that you're doing comes in, because it does give people that sense of personal independence and hope and stuff like that, or a sense of control over their lives in a way. But at the same time, like, I came back and I'm like, the only 2 ways, and this is me thinking, is sitting in my bedroom sometimes just having a deep thought about trying to process what I was after seeing out there, is the only 2 ways that there's going to be an end to that situation is if they wipe out all the Palestinians, or they just go and take over all the rest of the little pieces of Palestine that are left. And that, like, it nearly is futile to be sitting thinking about, okay, there's going to be an end to this at some stage.
We need another podcast for that.
Yeah.
that's another series of podcasts about what the future holds. And I think that's why I often just think about like what's going on now, because it's too multifaceted and too complicated to think of, or not too complicated, but it's very difficult to understand what could happen in the future. But right now, regular Palestinians feel abandoned by the international community, their own government. Like, the Palestinian Authority hasn't had an election in 14 years. Like, Abbas has been president for 14 years, you know, so regular young Palestinians don't have faith in him and don't believe that he's going to be able to deliver any sort of, you know, peace or justice for them. And then you also have, you know, increasing support sometimes for Hamas in Gaza because they're seen as the only viable option for people. And then that increasingly cuts them off from the international community. And so it's just, I suppose, sometimes the way you think about it is like, you know, the occupation is a juggernaut. So how do we stop the people from the bottom getting crushed, you know?
So we're going to just start wrapping it up in a second, but I guess, could you maybe like tell us how people can find out more about the project?
Yeah, so we have a Facebook page which posts in Arabic and in English, and also a website which is www.gazawomen-yogacircus.com. Like I said, not catchy, I'm sorry for that, but yeah, and so you can find out more information about the project, see some nice pictures of the women, and also on the Facebook page as well. So yeah, and all inquiries, questions, anything, like always happy to connect with people. Fundraising, as I know, you know, also maybe we could do a joint fundraiser for our two respective projects, you know, because I think like we only found each other last week, and I actually think that like it's such a good opportunity to be able to cross over the two projects and maybe make a connection between like Ida refugee camp in Bethlehem, which suffers a lot of the same issues as Gaza. It's like one of the most tear gas places in the planet. And then also like, you know, the women's aspect and how we can bring that more as well.
Thank you. So I just want to finish up and thank Jenny for being the guest on the podcast today, and also thank the Cork Podcast Festival for giving us the opportunity to come and sit in front of us and talk today.
And thanks for having me, and thanks for listening, guys. I hope it was interesting and not too confusing. We tried to fit in all those blank details about, you know, long history of complicated politics.
I mentioned this before to another person I was talking about. He was trying to explain to me about Syria last week, and I know now how people feel when I bring them to Belfast and like, okay, give me the history of quick rundown of like what the crack is in Belfast. And I was like, right, well, okay, so there was the Irish Republican Brotherhood. They turned into the Irish Republican Army. They split up into formed provisionals. Then there was the NLA, and it just goes on like that, the big massive list of sort of like shortened acronyms and stuff. But thanks very much everyone for listening, and go off, enjoy the rest of the podcast festival, whatever's left of it.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed being a part of the conversation with Jenny and also being a part of the podcast festival in Cork. Gurached Mila Maga to Jenny and for coming down all the way from Dublin to be my guest on that episode, and all the best for all future projects to Jenny as well. So Shanae, episode 60 is about to wrap up, and as I mentioned at the start of the episode, there's a bit of Roald Dahl after the outro music here, so if you want a bit of story time, then just stay tuned, let the outro music play out and listen to a wee section of Roald Dahl's book Boy Tales of Childhood. Slán go fóileach Ard Gael. This chapter of Roald Dahl's book, Boy Tales of Childhood, is called Little Alice and the Boil. If you want to go back to the start of this book, then go to episode 51 of the podcast here, and you'll find the first chapter of this book at the end of that episode. Little Alice and the Boil. During my third term at St. Peter's, I got the flu and was put to bed in the sick room, where the dreaded matron reigned supreme. In the next bed next to mine was a 7-year-old boy called Ellis, whom I liked a lot. Ellis was there because he had an immense and angry-looking boil on the inside of his thigh. I saw it. It was as big as a plum and about the same colour. One morning, in came the doctor to examine us, and sailing along beside him was the matron. Her mountainous bosom was enclosed in a starched white envelope, and because of this she somehow reminded me of a painting I once had seen of a four-masted schooner in full canvas running before the wind. "What's his temperature today?" the doctor asked, pointing at me. "Just over 100, doctor," the matron told him. "He's been up here long enough," the doctor said. "Send him back to school tomorrow." Then he turned to Ellis. "Take off your pyjama trousers," he said. He was a very small doctor with steel-rimmed spectacles and a bald head. He frightened the life out of me. Ellis removed his pyjama trousers. The doctor bent forward and looked at the boil. He said. "That's a nasty one, isn't it? We're going to have to do something about that, aren't we, Ellis?" "What are you going to do?" Ellis asked, trembling. "Nothing for you to worry about," the doctor said. "Just lie back and take no notice of me." Little Ellis lay back with his head on the pillow. The doctor had put his bag on the floor at the end of Ellis's bed, and now he knelt down on the floor and opened the bag. Ellis, even when he lifted his head from the pillow, couldn't see what the doctor was doing there. He was hidden by the end of the bed, but I saw everything. I saw him take out a sort of scalpel, which had a long steel handle and a small pointed blade. He crouched below the end of Ellis's bed, holding the scalpel in his right hand. "Give me a large towel, matron," he said. The matron handed him a towel. Still crouching low and hidden from little Ellis's view by the end of the bed, the doctor unfolded the towel and spread it over the palm of his left hand. In his right hand he held the scalpel. Ellis was frightened and suspicious. He started raising himself up on his elbows to get a better look. "Lie down, Ellis," the doctor said, and even as he spoke he bounced up from the end of the bed like a jack-in-the-box and flung the outspread towel straight into Ellis's face. Almost in the same second he thrust his right arm forward and plunged the point of the scalpel deep into the centre of the enormous boil. He gave the blade a quick twist and then withdrew it again before the wretched boy had had time to disentangle his head from the towel. Ellis screamed. He never saw the scalpel going in and he never saw it coming out, but he felt it all right, and he screamed like a stuck pig. I can see him now struggling to get the towel off his head, and when he emerged the tears were streaming down his cheeks and his huge brown eyes were staring at the doctor with a look of utter and total outrage. "Don't make such a fuss about nothing," the matron said. "Put a dressing on it, matron," the doctor said, "and with plenty of Mag sulph paste," and he marched out of the room. I couldn't really blame the doctor. I thought he handled things rather cleverly. Pain was something that we were expected to endure. Anaesthetics and pain-killing injections were not much of a thing in those days. Dentists, in particular, never bothered with them. But I doubt very much if you would be entirely happy today if a doctor threw a towel on your face and jumped on you with a knife. Goat's tobacco. When I was about 9, the ancient half-sister got engaged to be married. The man of her choice was a young English doctor, and that summer he came with us to Norway. Romance was floating in the air like moon dust, and the two lovers, for some reason we younger ones could never understand, didn't seem to be very keen on us tagging along with them. They went out on the boat alone, they climbed the rocks alone, they even had breakfast alone. We resented this. As a family, we'd always done everything together, and we didn't see why the ancient half-sister should suddenly decide to do things differently, even if she had become engaged. We were inclined to blame the male lover for disrupting the calm of our family life, and it was inevitable that he would have to suffer for it sooner or later. The male lover was a great pipe smoker. The disgusting smelly pipe was never out of his mouth except when he was eating or swimming. We even began to wonder whether he removed it when he was kissing his betrothed. He gripped the stem of his pipe in the most manly fashion between his strong white teeth and kept it there while talking to you. This annoyed us. Surely it was more polite to take it out and speak properly. One day, we all went in our little motorboat to an island we'd never been to before. And for once, the ancient half-sister and the manly lover decided to come with us. We chose this particular island because we saw some goats on it. They were climbing about on the rocks, and we thought it would be fun to go and visit them. But when we landed, we found that the goats were totally wild and we couldn't get near them. So we gave up trying to make friends with them and simply sat around on the smooth rocks in our bathing costumes, enjoying the lovely sun. The manly lover was filling his pipe. I happened to be watching him as he carefully packed the tobacco into the bowl from a yellow oilskin pouch. He had just finished doing this and was just about to light up when the ancient half-sister called on him to come swimming. So he put down the pipe and off he went. I stared at the pipe that was lying there on the rocks. About 12 inches away from it, I saw a little heap of dried goat's droppings, each one small and round, like a pale brown berry, and at that point, an interesting idea began to sprout in my mind. I picked up the pipe and knocked all the tobacco out of it. I then took the goat's droppings and teased them with my fingers until they were nicely shredded. Very gently, I poured these shredded droppings into the bowl of the pipe, packed them down with my thumb, just as the manly lover always did it. When that was done, I placed a thin layer of real tobacco over the top. The entire family was watching me as I did this. Nobody said a word, but I could sense a glow of approval all around. I replaced the pipe on the rock, and all of us sat back to await the return of the victim. The whole lot of us were in this together now, even my mother. I had drawn them into the plot simply by letting them see what I was doing. It was a silent, rather dangerous family conspiracy. Back came the manly lover, dripping wet from the sea, chest out, strong and virile, healthy and sunburnt. Great swim, he announced to the world. Splendid water, terrific stuff. He toddled himself vigorously, making the muscles of his biceps ripple. Then he sat down on the rocks and reached for his pipe. 9 pairs of eyes watched him intently. Nobody giggled to give the game away. We were trembling with anticipation, and a good deal of the suspense was caused by the fact that none of us knew just what was going to happen. The manly lover put the pipe between his strong white teeth and struck a match. He held the flame over the bowl and sucked. The tobacco ignited and glowed, and the lover's head was enveloped in clouds of blue smoke. "Ah," he said, blowing smoke through his nostrils, "there's nothing like a good pipe after a bracing swim." Still we waited. We could hardly bear the suspense. The sister, who was 7, couldn't bear it at all. "What sort of tobacco do you put in that thing?" she asked with superb innocence. "Navy cut," the male lover answered. "Players' Navy cut. It's the best there is. These Norwegians use all sorts of disgusting scented tobaccos, but I wouldn't touch them." "I didn't know they had different tastes," the small sister went on. "Of course they do," the manly lover said. "All tobaccos are different to the discriminating pipe smoker. Navy cut is clean and unadulterated. It's a man's smoke." The man seemed to go out of his way to use long words like discriminating and unadulterated. We hadn't the foggiest what they meant. The ancient half-sister, fresh from her swim and now clothed in a towel bathrobe, came and sat herself close to her manly lover. Then the two of them started giving each other those silly little glances and soppy smiles that made us all feel sick. They were far too occupied with one another to notice the awful tension that had settled over our group. They didn't even notice that every face in the crowd was turned towards them. They had sunk once again into their lover's world, where little children did not exist. The sea was calm, the sun was shining, and it was a beautiful day. Then, all of a sudden, the manly lover let out a piercing scream, and his whole body shot 4 feet into the air. His pipe flew out of his mouth and went clattering over the rocks, and the second scream he gave was so shrill and loud that all the seagulls on the island rose up in alarm. His features were twisted like those of a person undergoing severe torture, and his skin had turned the colour of snow. He began spluttering and choking and spewing and hawking and acting generally like a man with some serious internal injury. He was completely speechless. We stared at him, enthralled. The ancient half-sister, who must have thought she was about to lose her future husband forever, was pawing at him and thumping him on the back and crying, "Darling, darling, what's happening to you? Where does it hurt? Get the boat, start the engine. We must rush him to a hospital quickly." She seemed to have forgotten that there wasn't a hospital within 50 miles. "I've been poisoned," spluttered the manly lover. "It's got into my lungs. It's in my chest. My chest is on fire. My stomach's gone up in flames." "Help me get him to the boat, quick," cried the ancient half-sister, gripping him under the armpits. "Don't just sit there stirring. Come and help." "No, no, no," cried the now not-so-manly lover. "Leave me alone. I need air. Give me air." He lay back and breathed in deep draughts of splendid Norwegian ocean air, and in another minute or so he was sitting up again and was on his way to recovery. "What in the world came over you?" asked the ancient half-sister, clasping his hands tenderly in hers. "I can't imagine," he murmured. "I simply can't imagine." His face was as still and as white as virgin snow, and his hands were trembling. "There must have been a reason for it," he added. "There's got to be a reason." "I know the reason," shouted the 7-year-old sister, screaming with laughter. "I know what it is." "What was it?" snapped the ancient one. "What have you been up to? Tell me at once." "It's his pipe," shouted the small sister, still convulsed with laughter. "What's wrong with my pipe?" said the manly lover. "You've been smoking goat's tobacco," cried the small sister. It took a few moments for the full meaning of these words to dawn upon the two lovers. But when it did, and when the terrible anger began to show itself on the manly lover's face, and when he started to rise slowly and mechanically to his feet, we all sprang up and ran for our lives and jumped off the rocks into the deep water.